with D. Today I'm going to show you how to make a little boy's hat. I got a lot of questions about this over Easter. This was my son, part of my son's outfit. So I thought I would pop on here. I've made so many of these hats. He literally has a hat for every outfit. So I'm going to show you how to make this. I'll also provide a link at the end if you would like to purchase one. Here we go. Enjoy. So to start, you're just going to need scissors, your pins, and fabric, and a pattern, which I will also put a link to buy the pattern as well. So you just pin it onto the fabric, matching, of course, the arrows up and down the grain. The arrows are on the pattern, and then you just cut as many as it says. Cut them out. So there we have two. Cut two. Cut two. It says cut two of fabric and cut one of lining and cut one of fabric. But because I want the hat to be the same color on the inside as the outside, I'm just going to cut two of fabric. This one also has, this is the hat side, so cut four, two of fabric, two of lining, which again, I'm going to cut all of the fabric. So then for the peak of the hat, you just cut out one of the interfacing, and I just purchased this at my local fabric store. It's just a roll of, it's like a heavy, thick interfacing, perfect for hat peaks. So just lay that on there and your hat peak and cut one. So you're going to take your hat side, both of them. I always do the lining and the actual hat at the same time. You could do it all at once with the fabric and then do it the second time around with the lining, but I just always do it at the same time. And you're going to sew the end of these together right at the back of the hat, or sorry, the front of the hat, right here. And the seam allowance, I usually just leave about the zipper foot length. So just secure it with needles. Use as many as you need. I actually like using a lot of needles because it's better to keep your fabric together than have to redo it. So just use your zipper foot. There, so I just left the length of the zipper foot. Take out your needles and do the same thing with the lining. So after you finish sewing both of the hat side together, you're then going to steam. Press, press, press. I'm huge on pressing. You'll make or break an outfit by not pressing, so never skip this step. I press every seam that I make as I go. You'll be so grateful at the end when you see a finished product. It's basically nearly ready to wear because you've pressed every seam as you go. So you put that aside, and then you move on to your hat top. And you'll notice on the pattern, it ever so slightly kind of curves in there, kind of goes in. That is for, and it'll say on the pattern, you're going to clip it to there because we're going to make a back seam on the top of the hat, so that when you clip it, you'll have this little tiny opening, which we are now going to sew together, just 1/4 inch, and kind of fade your way in. So you're going to start at the end right here, 1/4 inch, and then kind of taper out to meet that point. And again, I'm using ivory thread because I have an outfit in mind for the ivory to go with, and I want to see the ivory top stitch once we start doing that. So you've got your dart made. Just kind of taper it. I taper it out to kind of like that. Do that for both. Okay, so then you're going, after you've pressed out your darts on the top of your hat, you're going to then find the center of the hat. So I just fold it in half and just mark it with a pin right at the very top. And then lay it down on your table. So then you're going to take your hat side right sides together. I'm going to put it down like that so that this high part, the top of the hat, is outside. So you take your center, pin it to the center where you had your center pin. So I always put a pin at the top and then one right at the very bottom. So sideways. That. So you're going to pin it right there like that. So kind of like this. You're going to, so that makes sense. So you're going to pin that all along there, all the way up, kind of stretching as you go, just so it will fit the hat top. Put as many pins in as you want, as long as you stretch the fabric as you go, so that it matches together. So this is what your hat should look like after you've had all of the pins pinned in. So I always, of course, do the lining as well. So here's my lining all pinned. And then you're going to sew it all the way around. Okay, so you're going to put it under your sewing machine, starting at one of the backs of the hat. Guess it doesn't matter which one. I like to start with that so that the hat side is up. And then of course I do the zipper foot length, back stitch, and then kind of tuck in as you sew so you don't get any bubbles or like folds in under while you're sewing. So I kind of just slowly kind of tuck the fabric down, keep it flat so you don't get any puckers, any folds in under. Stitch, cut off all your threads. Take out all your pins. There you have it. So you're going to turn both of your hat and your lining, the hat outside and your hat lining, turn them inside out, and let's get them pressed. Almost there. Okay, so after you've pressed both of your hats, we then move on to the hat peak. You're going to sew both of these together. Just around this edge, you leave this one open to put in the peak interfacing. So pin it all the way around. And then I always do the peak just a 1/4 inch stitch length. So instead of the width of the zipper foot, I always just 1/4 inch. I think my daughter took my scissors, my good scissors, to work on some of her sewing projects, and she left me with her handy dandy play scissors. so get this done, and what I always do to make this lay really good when you turn it inside out is I snip just a little bit. Be careful not to snip your thread that you just sewed, and just snip it all the way, just kind of barely, just a little tiny bit, so it's like a little tiny slit. See that? So just a pinch, so that when you turn it inside out, it lays a lot better. So this is your peak. You want to turn it inside out, and then you're going to press it really good, and you're going to put in your interfacing right inside. And so by now you're going to see that you're going to have a little bit left out over, so just snip that off before you sew it. So let's press it and put the interfacing inside. Okay, so once you get this done, you've got it all pressed in, your interfacing's inside. I always pick one side or the other to put my extra fabric, my seam allowance fabric. You can actually see a little tiny bit of a ridge right there. I chose this side to put it all on, so you don't have like a bumpy of some fabric on this side, some fabric on that side. So just pick one side and kind of press the fabric on that side. So what we're going to do now is make a top stitch on the outside of the peak. You can do this, or you don't have to do this. I choose to do it because I want to see that outside stitch. Okay, this should be inside, so that's okay. All right. So you've got like a top stitch that I want to see. Okay, so then you fold it in half, find your center, and just stick a pin in the center of your fabric. If you want to do a top stitch to keep these two layers together, you can. My interfacing has a stick on one side, so it's actually sticking to the fabric. But normally I would do like a little base stitch to keep these two layers together. So then you pick one of your either hat lining or the outside. It depends on if you're using different colors, and you know what one is your outside. So you choose the one that's going to be on the outside, and you put right sides together. So I want this side to be up, so I'm going to choose to put my extra fabric that I have, the inside seam, down. So find your seam that you already made in the hat side and start pinning right in that center, and then pin it on each side, and just kind of, you'll see that it's it fades down the side. There's no really gauge, as long as you get the center, and then slowly pin out. No need to stretch fabric, just pin. Just like that, and then do that on both sides, so that your hat will kind of look kind of like this. So here we go, we have it all pinned on. You're going to stick it under your sewing machine, and I always stitch this the length of the zipper foot. Always being careful that the fabric is not bunching up and under, keeping that flat. Pull your pins out or run over them, whatever you prefer. I usually just run over my pins, but some people are not comfortable doing that, so whatever you prefer. Of course, always checking to make sure the fabric is flat. Stitch at the corner. And so of course I'm sewing directly to the edge of the hat peak. Okay, pull out your pins. Get rid of any loose threads. Here you go. You are almost there. Now we're going to stitch the lining onto the hat. Okay, so you're going to take your lining, you're going to put your peak of your hat down, like don't leave it down like this, but put it back like that. Find both of those centers that you made in your hat sides and put both of these seams together. See that? Okay. And then start pinning all the way around, leaving just leaving a little tiny space in the back, maybe right here. I usually leave about 2 inches open right here, or you can do it on the side right here, 2 inches. And so just pin your hat all the way around, right sides together, and then we'll stitch them together. Okay, once you have your hat lining pinned on your hat all the way around, you are going, make sure I put a pin there so I remember to leave an opening. There. That should remind me to leave an opening to turn the hat inside out. And I always do it. You could also do it on the lining as well. A lot of people do it on the lining, but because I want to put elastic through the back, I leave this a little bit open so I can easily put the elastic through the back. All right, so start stitching. And again, I do this the length of the zipper foot. Okay, so we've sewn it all together. Again, the stitch length at the bottom is a zipper foot, and you've left the opening. So now we are going to turn our hat inside out, kind of just, I always start with a peak first because it's the most difficult to come out. So find that peak in there somewhere. And just slowly tug. Till it comes all the way out. Try not to bust the thread. If you do, not a big deal, you're going to sew it after, but be as gentle as you can be without busting any threads. Ta-da. All right, so my top stitch is right here. So this is my I didn't do it on this hat, but if you wanted to, before you stitch these two together, you could do a top stitch all the way around the top of the seams, so you can see this top stitch just like we did on the peak. You just do that before you sew them together. And there we have it. That's what the hat's gonna look like after we make it to fit the head. So what you're gonna do after, of course, you press all your seams, you're going to measure this hat on the head that's actually going to be wearing it. I know my son's measurements by now, so I just know what length to cut my elastic. And so you're going to put this on the head and kind of pinch, pretend this is the head. You're going to pinch to where you think it needs to be. So my son is 1 inch after I get this sewn. So you're going to pretend that's on the head, and you're going to pinch to where you need. So that's the amount of elastic you need to bring it closed, well, 2 inches by the time you get it out. So then you put 1 pin on that side, 1 on that side. Ta-da! So we need 2 inches of elastic. Or if you don't really know, just take your measurement, actually, so this is ending up to be like 2.5. So let's do 2.5 just to make it, 2.5, just to make it even on both sides. So that's the amount of your elastic. So you're going to cut a piece of elastic that, do you like my measuring tape? I've used it so much. Oh, it looks like it cut. Maybe one of my kids. So yeah, so you're going to measure between your 2 pins that you made. The pinch on the head that you've made, then you let that out, measure here, and that's what you're going to cut your elastic to be. So I've got several different sizes of elastic. Either one works. This is a 1/2 inch. This is a 1/4 inch. I'm going to use the 1/2 inch today. And you measure from your pin, leaving like a 1/4 or a little over a 1/4. Just kind of just leave some at the end so you can have somewhere to sew. You don't want to have exactly what you need, because then you won't have no space to sew it in the seam. Okay, so you're going to take this, take out your pins. And that hole that you've left, just stick that in through and go all the way over and pinch it in the seam. Okay, so you should be able to find it, no problem. All right, so put it right in that seam, leaving a little bit outside so you have a space to, and again, put all your fabric on the inside, the seam allowance that's inside. Leave the fabric all on one side so you don't have a bunch, lots of bumps of fabric. So I've tucked them inside, and again, see I've left about this much, about a 1/2, maybe a little less than a 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to flatten it out, make sure it's flat. Okay. And put my pin. What I'm going to do is sew all the way right there, just to secure the elastic. And then do the same thing with the other side. Make sure your extra fabric, the seam allowance fabric, is tucked inside. I always tuck it inside the lining, or on the side of the lining, sorry. Okay. So that was easy. Just secure that with a pin, and you're going to sew on each seam so that when he puts it on, it will pinch that 2 inches that you need. So just kind of go back and forth 2 or 3 times. When you secure it, take out your pin. So I did like 3 times, 4 times. Really no problem if you do it 2 or 3 times, or it's just the more you secure it, obviously the better it'll stay. And the better in the seam you get, the closer to the seam you get, the less you're going to see your thread. Okay, so we've got that secured. See that? On each side. And again, I'm okay with this thread showing. This is the thread I chose because I want to see that white thread on the outside. So you're going to stretch it out, and what we're going to do is create a pocket so that this is not sticking up like this. So you pinch. I always do the center first. Hold, secure a pin right there, and now go all the way on both sides and keep your elastic all the way down to your seam as you can. And then the other side. Okay, so what you're going to do is sew right along this without catching the elastic. So kind of meet each top of your thread where you secured the elastic. So it turns out to be a little less than 5/8 of a space between. So you put your fabric on the 5/8 on your sewing machine. And just sew along without trying not to catch the elastic. And even if you do, it's not the end of the world, but it will stop your elastic from stretching the amount that you want. All right. And then you pull out your pins. Ta-da! So you've created the back of the hat. Looking good. Okay, so what you're going to do next is you want to secure, before we put the peak on, attach it to the hat, we are going to close up this little opening you left for the elastic. So you're going to start your stitch really close. I mean, I go really, really close to the edge, like just a pinch. So you catch both of these layers and you're doing a top stitch all the way around. Go all the way around the fabric until you get to the other side of the elastic and then stop. So barely just enough to pinch both sides of that opening. And then just go all the way around. You make a nice top stitch. Make sure your fabric is tucked in so you don't have any bubbles. Beautiful. To the elastic and you back stitch, cut off your threads, just like that. So you've created a little top stitch all the way around and you've also closed up that opening that you had. Okay, so now you lay down your hat. You want this peak to be flat right there. Don't want any bubbles, and you create bubbles by pulling the hat too forward. So try not to put your peak all the way to the tip, because if you do, this is what's going to happen, is you're going to have a peak that's going to bubble right there. So just lay it down nice and flat. I always do that. I always push this up to make sure the lining is caught inside. So kind of just tuck that in and then put a needle right here. And you're going to stitch an inch on each side, let's say. So like 2 inches, 1.5 inches, whatever you prefer, just to secure this peak onto your hat. Okay, cut off your loose threads. Your pin. Ta-da! You've got a hat that's not, you don't want this to lift up. Ah, done a fantastic job. So if this hat fits perfectly right here, you have completed the hat. But because I've done so many of these, I kind of like to add a little bit of a design on this side. So what I'm going to do is we're going to put a little hat strap on this side. Normally I do this because I make all these hats a little bit bigger so that my son can wear them for a lot longer time than just as kids' clothes do, just a couple months. So what we're going to do is put a little design on the side with a button so that you can fit the hat. So just say you put the hat on now, it fits great, beautiful, you're done. Or you can just add this extra for a little bit of extra design. So we're going to put a little strap on the side with a button, and that way if you do need it a little bit tighter on his head or their head, you can just, it's kind of going to look like this. So we'll start doing that right now. Okay, so for our straps, we're going to take a piece of just scrap fabric. You're going to cut 2 rectangles. So we're going to do them about 3 inches by, let's say, 2 inches wide. rectangles, and you are going to sew these together. And you're going to sew across the top and down the one side. Sew across the top and just down the side, not the bottom. Again, I would do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you have to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just trim it to a 1/4 inch. So for mine, I did a 1/4 inch seam allowance across the top, but then the zipper foot all the way down. I just noticed it was a little too wide. So you cut this and then trim it to a 1/4 inch. So your finished product should be, it's about a 1/2 inch or a little over 1/2 inch wide. Yeah, it's like barely over a 1/2 inch. So then you want to flip these inside out or inside right. You can either do this with a knitting needle, some fancy tool that you can buy at the store, or the top of your scissors. Kind of just push out each corner. Don't push too far. If you're using scissors, don't push too hard because you'll push the scissors right out through the top. So again, but I find that the really big knitting needles work great. You can just push them out and they don't bust through your fabric. So see what I'm doing? I'm just pushing out the ends. And then we're going to press these 2 little straps, and then we'll get to sewing them on the hats. So after you've got your tabs pressed, you're going to measure your hat side between the peak and the elastic. Just mark the center. And again, I already measured my son's head in this hat. And we're just going to make it a tad bit tighter, like a 1/2 inch tighter. So you take your tab with the seam down and your sewn piece towards the peak. You're going to set that here. This is where you decide how long you want the tab. I cut off a little bit off the end because I only want my tab to be 1 3/4. You can have it as long as you want. It's where you judge. You kind of just lay it down, measure, and I said, okay, I just want it 1 3/4. So then I snipped it to leave a 1/4 inch to sew on. Now I'm going to put that down there. Take out my pin, and then I'm going to stitch on those 2 tabs. Okay, so we're going to stitch on a 1/4 inch. So you're going to have a tab that looks like this. Kind of just lay in. And again, this is totally up to you. I just normally put it in the center, but you can put it towards the front. Wherever you want to sew that tab on, you can. And because my son wants a little bit of a pinch to be tighter on his head, I'm going to just pinch it. There's threads everywhere. Pinch it like that. And right there, you're going to sew your button on right there, just like that. So it's just a little kind of a tab. If you don't want that to be tighter, just lay it down like flat, like this, and just use it as a design and sew on your button right there. Looks super cute. Either way, even if it's not being used to make the hat tighter, it's super cute, a design on the side. So because my sewing machine has a switch to sew on a button, I'm just going to lay this under my machine. and sew on the button. If you're going to do this by hand, I would recommend leaving the pin in and just sewing through, or put a little base stitch right there before you sew on your button, just to keep that in place. So, like so. That way you can take out your pin and then freely sew on your button, just like that. And then stitch your button right there in place. Okay, so you're going to take, once you've tacked that in place, kind of like just a little tack, you're going to take your button and sew it on right over that tack that you made. Get the right amount of stitching right there. And turn it. I have the 4 holes in my button, so I'm going to do the 4 holes. You can again do 2, that's fine, because it's just for design, not to really in a buttonhole, you know. So you're not going to be opening and closing it. There you have it. So I've heard someone say these were called Newsboys hats. So there you go. You've made a Newsboys hats with an adjustable elastic for when they grow. Tab on the side. You've done a great job. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment, subscribe, share this video.